stay home with the baby, or should this person go back to work? And we've come up with mathematical answers to that. But what's interesting to me is that I hear advice just as strongly on the side of, no, you need to, somebody needs to stay home with the baby, which is not coming from an economist, right? It might come from a fundamental religious bias or something. So it's not a mathematical decision, but you came in at, talking a little bit about it, but you came from a economic standpoint about answering that question and came to a totally different answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways a little bit of a different answer, but it's not like, I think basically when I go through what I do there is I really go through like what are the benefits, like are there benefits to the baby? And you kind of come down to like, there are some benefits to being home in the first few months, some benefits to some basic like maternity leave. But that if you think about the longer term issue of, is it better for your kid if the parent stays home or the parent doesn't stay home? Like for the kid, it's a bit of a wash, like, they're kind of not much either way. And so then you get into, all right, well, you kind of got to think about what's true, like what's going to make the family, like what's going to work for the family. And there's a piece of that that's financial. And then there's a piece of that that's people's preferences, which I think is sort of what you're saying, that there's like there's like the mathematical answer, which is like, let me figure out what would maximize your family income. And like, there's that piece of it. But then there's just like, okay, at the end of the day, like if you're rich and unhappy, that's like not the goal, right? The goal is not to accumulate money piles. The goal is to like use your money to make you as happy as possible, presumably. And for something like this, that means, you're like thinking about the financial consequences in a serious way, but also trading them off against whatever other preferences, whatever other things are going on in the background, but not against the sort of this like knee jerk, somehow like there's a right way to do this or a wrong way to do this. From your kid's standpoint, there are many good choices. The question is more like, what do you want?
Well, how do I keep from, or how would somebody keep from when they're researching to find these answers and make a decision that's important for them and their family? How do you keep from letting confirmation bias creep in and say, well, I'm just going to go find the answers that support what I kind of want to do anyway? I kind of want to make this decision, so I'm going to look for information that shows me that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously that's very hard. I think the best advice I have there is to try to really compartmentalize those two pieces. To say basically like acknowledge like the thing that I want is going to play a role in this decision. So there's going to be a part of the decision where I figure out what does the data say. And then there's later, I'm going to get the opportunity to think about what I want. But I can, because I'm going to get that opportunity later, I want to like separate it from this piece where I get the information. And so to try to say, I'm going to try, and again, this is a sort of try, like to try, I'm going to try to figure out both sides of this, but knowing that later I'm going to get to kind of incorporate the things that the sort of idea of my preferences. Because I think part of what happens in a lot of these decisions, particularly around parenting, exactly the thing you say, that like people have this idea like, okay, like because I want to do this, I want to find the data that supports doing that. The thing that's so damaging, I think, about that is that then you end up being mean to other people, right? It's like, I want my choice to be not just right for me, but like so right that it's the right choice for everyone. And then I'm being an asshole. And so, you really want to try to be able to say, I looked at these data and I decided what was right for me. And in some ways, if you can do that, then maybe you won't be so judgy about other people.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. People often go find the information that supports the conclusion they already have. And I see that in finance, I see that in a lot of different areas. I'm sure it exists with, raising children. Of course, I want to justify my decision to work, to not work. And if I'm looking for that justification, then that means it's gotta be because it's the right choice, not just a right choice.
Yeah. And I think that distinction is sort of like, I think partly in these spaces where people care so much, it's very hard to acknowledge that if someone else did something different, they could also be right. You just really want it to be so right. And that leads to, looking for kind of evidence that it's right for everybody, rather than being able to just step back and say, that's the right thing for me. And I think it's part of what makes some aspects of parenting really stressful.
it's dangerous too, because obviously I'm not a parent, hoping to not be a parent anytime soon, but I had an experience with this exact idea, right? So I used to dip tobacco all the time, every day. And so if you're going to continue to do things that are harmful to your health, like, you've got two options. One is to not do it, or two is to justify the continued behavior. So I chose option two for many years. And there are a couple of guys in my office that also use smokeless tobacco. So we would kind of feed on each other and just continue to justify. So I'm pretty analytical. This Jason, he's pretty analytical too. And he went and researched all this data, right, to justify why it wasn't unhealthy. And the biggest thing was that we always heard about smokeless tobacco is it causes mouth cancer, right? That's what everyone says. That's what they think. That's what I was told. That's what my dentist told me. And he went and looked it up, and he found that the rate of mouth cancer was essentially the same across the country, even though different states had different use of smokeless tobacco. And so the conclusion that we all drew was, we're not getting cancer, so it doesn't matter. And what we then did was we discounted all of the other possible negative consequences, because we said, well, if this mouth cancer thing is a lie,
everything else must be a lie too.
Everything else is a lie. And so it was funny because I quit. I went to the dentist after I had quit, and I was like, hey, it's been like 3-4 months. I haven't used any tobacco. They were like, oh, that's really good. And they go, so we'll see you do you still want to come in every 3 months? Because I had been going every 3 months instead of like every 6 months to a year, because I was nervous about getting mouth cancer. And they were like, do you still want to do that? And I said, well, I mean, shouldn't I? Because like I could still get cancer because I used to do it. And my dentist looks me dead in the eyes. He goes, no, that we were just trying to scare you. Like, you're not.
That's not a thing. Nobody gets it. Great.
It's
okay.
not even a thing.
But you already quit. So what's the,
Yeah, but at the same time, I'm like, why do these, if these rules or if these misinterpretations of data exist and permeate through, the culture, through the population, and we pick up on them, and one rebel out there like you challenges them, it's so tempting for them to all fall apart.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is such a big issue with some of our messaging that, like, I mean, what, you're like, it isn't a good idea to use smokeless tobacco, but your example is exactly, it's sort of like, okay, you're telling me this, like the scariest thing. It turns out like that particular thing is like, there's other reasons not to do it.
No,
okay,
I'll just
like,
have yellow teeth and they'll fall out later, but I'm not going to get cancer.
It's like a little gross, but they've come up with sort of this, and then they tell you that, but then when you disprove it, it's like, well, what, I mean, this, this comes up in we sort of have this idea that if we just make the public health messaging more extreme, people will like eventually start to respond to it, as opposed to then when they realize that actually some of the things you're saying are insane, they're gonna be like, well, you said this crazy thing. Like, I'm not gonna, why do I believe any of the things you say? You told me this bananas thing was obviously wrong. And then, you're nuts. And by the way, we are seeing a lot of this in COVID, not to like bring it to the elephant in the room, but all of this, like, our total inability to communicate nuance to people, that we're just like lurching between different public health messages. Vaccines are perfect, well, but they don't protect you from it. Like, as opposed to sort of saying, look, here's the kind of more nuanced thing. And this is, I think, part of why people don't trust.
Yeah, now we've got two different groups of people. You've got the double maskers and the no maskers.
We got the COVID deniers and the zero riskers, is what I like to call them.
Yeah,
that's true.
And there's a hard space, hard to find the space in the middle.
Do you find that when people are sort of aligned in these two camps, whether it's on breastfeeding or not breastfeeding, or if it's this or that or the other thing, that there become these two defined camps where schools have thought that it kind of doesn't matter, or that can half the people really be that wrong? Or did you find any sort of common thread when it was sort of aligned where where it was sort of in debate, that it didn't matter? Or
I mean, I think people like to be in a camp. They don't like to be in the kind of the unwashed middle, right? I mean, this is, you really like to be,
Be on a
validated
team.
by the people that agree with you, or
Yeah.
like be it's just like people like there's like such an in-group bias, right? In sort of psychology, like I just want to be in my group. And so if my group is the, breastfeed all the time group, that's the group I want to, I want to be in with them, and I want to be like really bought into their business.
So you start challenging, I think you're right. People sort of get in these groups and then it's hard to convince people otherwise. It's kind of like your favorite sports team, whatever it is. There's no way I'm going to convince you that your team is not the right team to follow. It's kind of just what you believe and what you do. And a lot of the folks on the sort of the anti-vaxxer group, let's say,
Yeah.
it's sort of what they believe. Facts be damned. I mean, that's what they're going to believe. It's hard to convince them otherwise. How would you recognize if you're one of these people in this group? Like maybe I'm in this group, but I don't know it.
I think we're all, I'm sorry to report, I think we're all in some of these groups. I think there's a lot of things where it's almost certainly true for everybody that there's something about this, something that you're so almost like so committed to that data wouldn't affect you. I think that's kind of how I define this group. Like, what is it that you believe so strongly that it really doesn't matter if somebody showed you data, like you would just like show you like the best evidence on that, you just still wouldn't believe it.
Yeah, people just say, no, it's BS.
Yeah, just like, no, that's not, I don't know. I think you made.
I still am going to believe what I'm going to believe. Facts be damned.
And I think, the thing is we probably all have things like that.
Did you find anything when you were doing, and you've done a ton of research on this stuff, did you find anything that really surprised you, that shook you out of one of those camps? You're like, oh my gosh, I've believed this my whole life. I can't believe that I was wrong.
I think I came into most of this without a lot of I was like, when you parent, you're just like, oh, everything is new and I'm so there weren't that many things about which I had like a very strong preconception about.
Occupational hazard that you came in so open-minded then maybe?
Yeah, maybe that's right. Like this thing about like economists, like we always have two hands, right? It's like, and this famous line, somebody was like, get me an economist with only one hand. They're like, on one
right.
hand, on the other hand, no, on the other hand. And so I think we're, but I mean, there are things about this. I mean, I'm sort of honest about this in the book. There are things where like one thing for me is like spanking. I don't believe in spanking, and there's kind of no information that you would show me. And I sort of like that. Not everybody agrees with that. But that for me, that was sort of a thing where like, there is just nothing you could show me that would make me think that was a good idea. And I did end up writing about it, but it's sort of with that caveat at the start, like, I'm coming into this with a much stronger bias than I do with almost anything else.
That one's tough because there's no one who's wishy-washy on hitting their kids. I could
all in favor of it, or you're right. They're definitely
if you're a pro spanker, you have to be hardcore in the pro spanker camp. Otherwise, you're just kind of hitting.
You're like, what am I doing here?
Yeah, because basically nobody. I mean, I think the space there is like, people wouldn't really say it like I'm hitting my kid, but so there's a sort of like, but there is there's a camp of people who think there are people who think that is a system of discipline. Sure. That is. Yeah.
But even if it's good, and even if
they wouldn't phrase it like that,
you still have to think it's great, because if it's a neutral for the kid, well, geez, man, that's pretty extreme measure to go to for a neutral outcome.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think the data suggests it's, my read of the data is that it is not supportive of that as even neutral as an outcome.
What's your data show on it?
Just the data on this mostly shows that it actually worsens behavioral problems rather than making them better.
Is that
there are other methods of discipline that are more effective at improving behavior.
Sure. What do you think it is that people hang on to with that one specifically?
Their upbringing. I mean, I think that some, like most people.
I got spanked. I'm fine.
And I love my parents. And like, I have a good relationship with my parents, and they, I think they raised me well. And I think that was like and I mean, I think that there are many of the things that we do as parents are things that our parents did. Sure. And, like on a sort of lighter note, there are many things I think as a kid that we think I wouldn't do it like that. And then you do it. Like for me, it's like peanut butter. Like when I was a kid, there was like these commercials for Jif, And I was like, and my mom always bought the like peanut butter with the oil on the top that you mix, like natural peanut butter, you know? Are you familiar with this kind of peanut butter?
Oh, yeah.
And my whole life, I was like, when I have kids, we're gonna have so much Jif. It's gonna be